As it was getting ready to make a circle approach to runway 12, an Airbus A320 went off track. The airplane flew straight towards the Margalla Hills instead of making a left turn. The first officer was pleading with the captain to alter the course as the alarms were going off. Terrain, terrain. Air Blue Plane 202 was traveling by scheduled passenger aircraft from Jinnah International Airport in Karachi, Pakistan, on July 20, 2010, to Benazir Bhutto International Airport in Islamabad, Pakistan. On board were 152 people, 6 of whom were crew members. The flight's 61-year-old captain was Pervez Iqbal Chaudhary. He logged 25,497 flying hours, 1,060 of which were on the Airbus A320 series. The first officer was 34-year-old Muntajib Ahmad, a former Pakistan Air Force F-16 pilot. He had completed 1,837 flying hours, 286 of which were on the Airbus A320 series. Constructed in the year 2000, the aircraft was an Airbus A321-231 that had accrued over 34,000 flying hours in 13,500 flight cycles. The jet was headed for Islamabad from Karachi. The pilot flying was the captain, and the pilot supervising was the first officer. As the plane climbed to its designated height, the captain began to quiz the first officer on various topics. The captain broke company policy by using some foul language. The first officer responded to the queries posed by the captain. Then he delivered speeches and counsel, up to an hour after takeoff. This was done at intervals. The first officer was met with these actions from the senior, which made him quiet, apprehensive, and insecure. It's reasonable to infer from this interaction that the co-pilot would not be able to hold the captain accountable for any mistakes he might have made while flying. From Islamabad, Flight 202 was traveling at an altitude of flight level 330 or 155 nautical miles. After listening to the ATC information, the crew learned that runway 30 was the runway being used at Islamabad. In Islamabad, it was pouring, and there was only 3.5 kilometers of visibility. The skipper readied himself for the visual circling approach after discovering that low clouds and decreased visibility necessitated a visual circling approach for runway 12. The pilots must maintain constant visual contact with the runway to execute the circular approach to runway 12. They have to perform the go-around if they lose visual contact. Regarding Islamabad, the aircraft should turn 45 degrees to the right and stay on this heading for 30 seconds after breaking off from the approach to ILS runway 30. Then, after passing or shining the runway 12 threshold, it should turn left and fly parallel to the runway. After 20 seconds, the crew should turn 90 degrees to the left to enter the base leg. They should then turn left once again to line up with runway 12. The first officer was ordered by the captain to enter 4 unapproved locations, bearing distance waypoints in the flight management system. The first officer refrained from confronting the captain for his improper behavior because of his perceived superiority. After Flight 202 began its descent, the first officer asked for a right downwind runway 12 to be used for the approach. In response, the controller stated that low clouds prevented the use of runway 12, which is located right downwind. The airplane was 4,300 feet above the ground. A TC gave the crew the all-clear to drop to 3,900 feet in preparation for an ILS approach to runway 30 and a circling approach to runway 12. The airplane, both autopilots engaged, established on the ILS. The crew then inquired once again. In response, the air traffic controller stated that only left downwind was available for runway 12 and that right downwind was not accessible. The cloud ceiling was varying near the minimum descending altitude and it was pouring. They could not clearly see the runway because of the cloudy and wet weather. The first officer informed the captain that the minimum descending altitude for Islamabad was 2,500 feet. Thus, he should not descend as low as 2,000 feet. At a height of 2,500 feet, the captain leveled the aircraft. The pilot was informed that the identical weather conditions resulted in the safe landing of Pakistan International Airlines Flight 356, a prior flight. He felt pressured to make sure they landed in Islamabad. Due to low visibility, the breakoff to the right, following the ILS approach, was delayed. The captain gave the order to turn right and proceeded to fall to 2,300 feet without making visual contact with the ground, which is against the minimum descent altitude of 2,500 feet. The captain dismissed the air traffic controller's suggestion to go into a holding pattern and wait for the weather to clear. When making a circling approach to runway 12, the aircraft must remain within 8 km of the runway. Upon circling, the captain informed the first officer that they would fly to bearing distance waypoint 11, bypassing the timed leg. Since the aircraft was heading 352 degrees and more than 3.5 nautical miles from the runway centerline, abeam the runway 12 threshold, this waypoint was outside the protected area. Using the autopilot, the skipper ordered a left turn at a pitch of 300 degrees. By now, they ought to have switched to the base leg if they were flying the routine. They were, however, flying below the minimum descent altitude beyond the protected zone and more than 9 kilometers from the runway as a result of improper procedures. The airplane was now south of the restricted region by 1 nautical mile. They were told to turn left to get out of the no-fly area by the air traffic controller. The crew was asked by a TC if they could see the airfield. This time, the first officer asked the captain when the crew failed to provide an answer. This inquiry revealed that the crew was unable to see the runway. However, the initial police officer inquired as to whether he would be honest or not. The crew then notified a TC that they could see the airstrip. At waypoint 11, the captain switched to nav mode, and the autopilot started directing the aircraft towards the starting point of the pre-programmed track. 13 kilometers to the northwest of the runway was where this was situated. The crew had no idea that, at their current height of 2,300 feet, they would crash into the hills before they could make it to waypoint 11. The aircraft continued to fly straight towards waypoint 11. Since the aircraft was in nav mode, the captain was trying to move it to the left by placing the heading bug on the lowered headings but without turning the heading knob. The skipper eventually pulled the knob after realizing he had forgotten to do so. Regretfully, in his attempt to turn the jet left, he accidentally twisted the knob so far to the right that it looped back around, causing the airplane to automatically turn the shortest path to the right towards the Margaga Hills. 3,700 feet was the new chosen altitude. The airplane began climbing as it turned right, and the propulsion lever was pulled to the fully forward position. Subsequently, the captain activated the auto thrust again while in climb mode, choosing 3,100 feet as the height. The captain kept the heading knob turned to the left. However, the autopilot kept turning the plane to the right because he was only decreasing the selected heading towards 0 degrees. Then he unplugged the autopilot and started turning left by hand. The pilot depressed the nose down and rolled the aircraft 52 degrees to the left by utilizing the side stick to make a leftward input. To maintain velocity on target, auto thrust caused the engines to spool down as the aircraft pitched down and gained speed. At a speed of 3,000 feet per minute, the aircraft began its descent. With haste, the pilot started raising the plane. Unfortunately, it was too late. While making a circle approach for runway 12, the aircraft collided with Margalla Hills, 9.6 nautical miles northeast of Benazir Bhutto International Airport. The impact pressures caused all 152 passengers to suffer fatal injuries as the plane descended at a speed of 3,000 feet per minute, while in a modest nose-down and high left bank attitude. With Airbus's assistance, the Pakistani Civil Aviation Authority carried out the inquiry. November 2011 saw the release of the final report. The main causes of this incident, according to the investigators, were the weather and the cockpit crew's lack of professionalism. The investigation also stated that the captain disregarded many instructions from air traffic control and automatic terrain warning systems, or failed to react to them appropriately. The report further stated that after the captain had repeatedly berated the first officer in an arrogant and contradictory manner, the first officer had simply accepted the captain's conduct without question. They committed grave protocol violations and flying discipline breaches in their haste to land in bad weather. It caused the aircraft to be in an unsafe condition at a low altitude over hazardous terrain. The family representatives expressed dissatisfaction with the completed report and questioned the reliability of the investigators as well as their credentials. If you found this video informative or thought-provoking, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content on aviation.